and madly teach. Chapter 3. The Doctrines of Modern Education. Part 2. Modern education says the curriculum must be based on the child's needs, interests, and abilities. This doctrine might be called the cornerstone of modern educational theory, for it is advocated on every hand and dinned into every prospective teacher. It is a nice, plausible-sounding doctrine, and indeed a perfectly valid one if accepted cautiously and with reservations, for it is obviously true that all students do not have the same interests or the same abilities, and that learning will be most effective when it takes account of these individual differences. The good teacher will always encourage native talents, but if a well-rounded education is the objective, as it should be, he will make every effort to ensure that the student works hard at the things for which he doesn't have much talent or taste. If you're passionately fond of history, the chances are you're going to learn it more thoroughly than mathematics, which may fill you with ennui. But for the teacher to deduce from this circumstance that the curriculum for you ought to be centered around your interest in history is to abandon objective values and to say, in effect, that a good education is simply one which teaches you about the things in which you are interested. In modern educational practice, this turns out to be, essentially, a lazy man's theory and enables the teacher who finds Johnny or Mary a little dull-witted in the academic subjects to ease up on them on the basis of supposed lack of interest and ability, and to shove them into more courses in manual training or industrial arts or home economics, where mechanical skill takes precedence over thinking. The courses in these latter subjects are indeed very often nothing more than a device for taking care of pupils the school feels it can't educate. I once heard an educator illustrate the theory that learning is most significant when it relates to the learner's concerns and interests by drawing an idyllic picture of American farm life of 50 years ago. He asked us to recall what a splendid education the farm boy got in real life by feeding the chickens, milking the cows, planting and harvesting, and so forth. And he pointed out how freely the boy entered into this education because of its direct concern with him, and because it gave him an opportunity to express himself in action. I did not question for a moment the value of such an activity, but I think that educator was deluding himself about the boy's joy in the farm work, for it is a notorious fact that the last 50 years has seen a steadily increasing stampede of farm boys escaping the joys of farm work for the dullness of city life. I don't think the farm boy then or now did his work for any more glamorous reason than that he had to do it. I don't think work is something most children enjoy, whether it relates to their concerns or is remote from those concerns. Pleasure in work is at best a rudimentary feeling in youth and fully develops only with maturity, and sometimes not even then. Anybody who has observed children even in the most superficial way knows they don't like to work. Did you ever know a child who enjoyed mowing the lawn or drying the dishes, even when he had the incentive of earning money by doing it? Now, as a large part of education is work, the less facility you have for a particular subject, the harder you will have to work. The teacher must necessarily be a taskmaster. And the fact that nasty characters like Dr. Arnold of Rugby and Mr. Squeers of Dothby's Hall thought so too doesn't detract in the slightest from the hard, unsentimental truth of the matter. Only a psychopathic teacher will consider the work an end in itself. It is only the means, the always slow and sometimes painful means, by which a child develops towards the understanding that is necessary for happiness and a feeling of pleasure in life. To evolve a theory which holds that the child should not have to make the attempt to learn subjects which do not interest him, and for which he seems to have little ability, or which do not relate to his seeming concerns. To say, in short, that the hard task, the unpleasant task, should be abandoned, is to cheat the future adult. A logical outcome of this doctrine is that the idea that there should be common standards of learning is now considered terribly old hat. I have referred to the report issued a few years ago by the New York State Education Department. This report, prepared by 10 leading public school men, states, quote, "While there is an obligation on the school's part to emphasize the mastery of essential learnings, there is no intention in the prescription of constants that pupils shall be held to a common level of achievement." The term constants, by the way, is educational cant for the basic subjects of the curriculum, such as English, history, mathematics, etc. In Connecticut, these subjects are called fundamentals, and elsewhere are referred to variously as common learnings and general education and solids or core curriculum. Educators are highly inventive when it comes to double talk. I believe this statement would be acceptable to almost all modern educators, but doesn't this supposition that there are, in education, no general standards, that all students should meet, but only standards for each according to his ability, doesn't this supposition make education largely meaningless? Dr. Mort and Dr. Vincent, who paint a glowing picture of modern education in their recent book, A Look at Our Schools, say, quote, "The employer, like the parent, should realize that there is every level of competence in every aspect of human activity. The particular combination of talents he wants in the persons he hires cannot be engraved on a high school diploma." While this is true enough in one sense, we may well ask why the employer, in hiring the graduate of a commercial high school course, shouldn't expect that her diploma means she can not only type and do shorthand, but that she can spell and has some sense of how to use the English language. Why is it unreasonable to demand that a high school diploma represent genuine educational accomplishment towards meeting a general standard of learning? If we accept the theory that the job of the school is to teach each pupil according to his supposed capacity, then the only thing we can be sure a high school diploma means is that the pupil spent 4 years in the school building. I can never understand how the modern schoolman who has a fetish about education being as nearly as possible a duplication of quote-unquote real life can reconcile this point of view with the doctrine that accomplishment is to be measured by interest and capacity. Real life is full of compulsions. It is dominated by competition, and the adult is constantly having to submit to examinations with his fellows. But these are conditions the thoroughgoing modernist will not permit in his classroom. The result is that in the end, all his elaborate effort to reproduce real-life experiences amounts to play and make-believe, a kind of mimicry. The young person who has been indoctrinated with this kind of education will find when he graduates into the adult world that the idea of being in competition only with yourself bears little relation to that world. What I find most misleading about this doctrine is the needs part of it. While it is true in the psychological sense that the needs of individuals vary, one pupil may be of a dependent nature and in constant need of encouragement, while another may be entirely independent and without this need. It is also true that what set us apart as human beings are certain common needs that only education, in the true sense, can meet. It is a mistake to conceive of education only as a training towards mechanical competence. For competence alone can never make for that understanding of what human life at its best can be, the deep-seated desire of even the most inarticulate of human beings. The belittling of what they call verbal intelligence and bookishness by Dr. Mort and Dr. Vincent seems highly futile, for by far the greater part of man's wisdom is stored up in books, and the fact that one pupil may have less facility for gleaning it than another does not alter the truth that both have the need for that wisdom. Here the teacher in the field may object. This is all very well, but you don't know some of my pupils. Many of them are just incapable of learning the bookish subjects, and when they have real talent for more practical matters, it seems wrong to insist on the former while neglecting the latter. But this is the challenge of modern teaching. how to reach every pupil, bookish and non-bookish, with the world's wisdom. It is not an easy task. Perhaps it calls for a genius we haven't the right to expect in the average teacher, but only by accomplishing it will common human needs be met. One can certainly agree with the progressives that old-fashioned methods of teaching history and literature are badly in need of revision, even if one disagrees with the suggested new methods. Dates and lists of battles and assorted other facts in history have their place. But history is more than this. It is the unfolding story of man's progress through time, and even the dullest pupil can enjoy a story if the teacher has a sense of drama. The study of literature can be exciting when the pupil awakes to the realization that Shakespeare and Milton are saying things about life and human nature which have a direct bearing on contemporary affairs. But he or she will never experience this awakening if teachers continue to teach The Merchant of Venice and Paradise Lost piecemeal, line by line, torturing all the meat and meaning out of them. But the fact that teaching is a difficult and subtle art is no reason for abandoning true education and telling ourselves that training in skills, which is far simpler for the teacher, is an adequate substitute. The need of our times is not for more well-trained people, but for better educated people. Number 3. Modern education says, teaching must be reorganized to eliminate as much as possible systematic learning of logically organized subject matter, to be replaced by integration of all subject matter towards an overall objective. This is another cardinal tenet of the new education, inherited from Dewey and his followers, and is being applied particularly in the early elementary school phase of education. Dewey has said that it is a mistake for the teacher to tell or state things to the pupil, quote, for the sake of impressing them upon another, merely in order to test him to see how much he has retained and can literally reproduce, unquote. The thing that has to be done is to link up, he says, the net results of the experience of the group and even the race with the immediate experience of an individual. Subject matter must deal with real, not theoretical situations. Lifelikeness and reality are the desirable qualities, according to Dr. Mort and Dr. Vincent. These authors tell us that first graders should not be drilled on processes of addition and subtraction, but kept busy playing counting games, measuring the width and breadth of the room, weighing themselves and recording gains in weight, that is, applying arithmetic to real-life situations. These same authors suggest that we must not teach geography in the deadly fashion of the 1900 model school, that is, by required reading and systematic learning of facts, but by dramatization of phases of the life of foreign children, preparation of illustrated booklets, building of model cities and farms. As an accompaniment to this opposition to logically organized subject matter, the modernist usually advocates building the curriculum around major goals or objectives and integrating all subject matter around these goals. One of the primary outcomes of this idea has been the growth of the so-called social studies. Probably most of the readers of this book went to school in the old unhappy days when history and geography and civics were definite separate courses, but their children know them as social studies, or even as social sciences. I want to avoid all amateur dogmatism on this particular doctrine, but from my admittedly limited experience, I must confess to a certain degree of skepticism. I'm not at all sure that drill, practice, and memorization are as ineffective in the learning process as our modern schoolman would have us believe. They are not ends in themselves, certainly, but do they not constitute the indispensable spade work that must be gone through before understanding can come alive? Just as the musician's long novitiate of practicing mechanical scales and octaves is the necessary preliminary to his being able to play with facility, understanding, and feeling? Considering it slowly on the basis of accumulated factual knowledge, I wonder if the contemporary youth knows as much as the benighted 1900 model school pupil. He's a little more glib in his opinion, perhaps, but as to his knowing as much, I doubt it. The old saw about the little boy from a modern school who countered his mother's complaint about his getting only 30 in arithmetic and spelling by proudly pointing out that he got 100 in post-war planning is not without a large kernel of truth. Dr. Morton and Dr. Vincent complained that the older type of school spent too much wasted motion in drill and practice of word meanings, spelling rules, sentence diagrams, problems in area and volume, the answers to which were soon forgotten because they didn't relate to practical use in real situations. Then they quote the hypothetical case of the person who said, "I never really began to learn Spanish, although I had 4 years of it in school, until I had to take over our firm's South American correspondence." But weren't the student's long years of application to Spanish grammar, syntax, and pronunciation a pretty vital element in his learning the language? He could have learned Spanish by going to South America and mimicking the speech of the natives. But to conduct correspondence, he had to learn the structure of the language, which means abstract study and drill. Of course, part of the value of knowledge is in use, but in acquiring knowledge, there is necessarily a long, difficult period of what often seems to the student useless and tiring practice. Nothing thoroughly learned is ever forgotten. It lies buried deep in memory, ready to rise to the consciousness when the occasion for use presents itself. You may protest that nobody but pedants remember the days of history or the rules of grammar or the names of rivers and principal cities in geography, so why emphasize these inert facts? The purpose of education, you may say, is not to train young people for participation in radio quiz shows. No one, of course, should be expected to remember the multifarious details of all school subjects, and no one does. But isn't one's education largely the valuable residuum that results from exposure to this diversity of factual information? You may have forgotten the rules of syntax and how to parse a sentence, but your study of grammar has left you with an instinctive sense of how to construct a sentence. You may have forgotten the dates of the reign of Henry VIII and the adoption of the Monroe Doctrine, but you have a sense of the chronological order of man's history on this globe. You may not be able to name offhand the 10 principal rivers of the United States or the capitals of all the states, but you have an ordered geographical picture of your country and other countries. Call these dull facts if you wish, but they are the indispensable background of a well-ordered, that is, a well-educated mind. And the only time to get this background is in childhood, when memory is freshest and keenest. Any educational system that belittles the importance of this background or spends too much effort in trying to find a painless way to impart it is cheating the children under its care. As to the integrated social studies versus old-fashioned history and geography, a friend of mine recently related to me a story that has some relevance here. She had an occasion to act as substitute teacher of an 8th grade in social studies, and on this particular day, the class was reading together one of those miniature newspapers which are issued weekly for classroom use and are designed to keep children abreast of current affairs. The topic of discussion was the principles and organizational structure of the United Nations, a fairly intricate subject even for adults. A comparison was made between the United Nations and the old League of Nations, which contained a reference to the League's headquarters at Geneva. On asking the class to tell her where Geneva is, my friend discovered that no one knew, or even had the foggiest idea of its approximate location. One pupil timidly suggested that perhaps it was in Japan. On questioning them further, she found that they generally had no mental image of the geographical world and the location of countries and cities. Their geography had been so correlated and integrated into the social studies that it had practically disappeared. But isn't it a little nonsensical to expect 8th grade pupils to master the complex issues of world organization if they don't know anything about the physical facts of the world? I have also heard 6th and 7th grade pupils under the tutelage of Mr. Harold Rugg's famed social studies textbooks sound off on the influence of Isadora Duncan on the modern dance and the virtues of modern architecture, as exemplified in the personality of Frank Lloyd Wright, while they knew practically none of the simple facts of geography and history. They are far too immature to get any meaning from the former, which are matters for reflective adult consideration, and their minds are ripe to receive the latter. The result is necessarily a meaningless parroting of their elders, accompanied by a woeful ignorance of fundamental factual knowledge that they will need as they grow older and have to make adult choices and express adult opinions. Bronson Alcott was something of a pompous old windbag, and I can't discover that he ever said anything else of importance. But he did say this: to be ignorant of one's ignorance is the malady of the ignorant. To be ignorant of one's ignorance is the malady of the ignorant. The virus of this malady is inherent in modern educational philosophy. One can only feel a melancholy regret that our schools are sending young people into the world blithely unaware of the real treasures of an educated life.